All right, hi everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to Empower Missouri's 2025 Legislative Recap webinar. My name is Lucas Caldwell McMillan, and I am the Chief of Policy Staff at Empower. And I'm going to get us started, and then you'll hear from our subject matter expertise on the issues that occurred during this last legislative session. So we'll do first a quick session overview, highlights, lowlights, and then we'll jump into our three core issue areas and hear about the bills that passed and stalled during this last legislative session. First from community justice, then food security, then affordable housing, and then we'll end with some upcoming events and opportunities for advocacy. So with that, for a session overview, I'll pass it over to Mallory Rush, our Executive Director.
Hey everybody, it is great to be here with you today. Hopefully those of you who do a lot of work in the Capitol have had a chance to rest and recover over the last few days. I know it was a really intense last couple of weeks. I'm like Lucas said, I'm just going to kick us off with kind of a high level overview of what happened in this legislative session. It was interesting. This was definitely a more productive session than we have seen in recent years. Last year, at the close of session, the legislature had only passed 28 bills. And for the last 5 years, we never saw the body break a total of more than 50 bills in a year, not including appropriations bills. But this year, we just barely cracked that. A total of 51 bills were passed, plus 16 appropriation bills. We definitely saw the body working a little bit better together. I think a lot of folks in the building will tell you that this was definitely the most collegial session in recent history. I give a lot of credit to the new leadership in both chambers, who really did, for the vast majority of the session, really seemed to be playing pretty nice. I think it definitely helped that a couple of the Freedom Caucus members who had sort of been causing a lot of issues on the Senate side the last couple of years, their terms had expired, and so they were no longer in the body. That seemed to have things be running a little more smoothly on the Senate side, until they didn't. So I think, as most everyone knows, last week the session closed with a double PQ. PQ stands for the previous question, and it is a very rarely used move that the legislature can employ to essentially shut down all debate and call for an immediate vote on any given topic. We do not use it very often in Missouri. It has only been used 18 times by the Senate since 1970. It's a very rare maneuver. I know that since I've been working in the building over the last 5 years, it has been threatened every single year and never employed until this year. And they used it last Wednesday, twice in a row to ram through votes on two issues that had just been approved by voters, by a majority of Missouri voters in November. So with that, they overturned the paid sick leave provision of Proposition A, which had been really hard fought for by individuals across the state. This was a ballot initiative that was put on the ballot by the people, signatures gathered by the people, votes made by the people, and the legislature simply decided that they knew better and that they were, that voters didn't understand the consequences that this was going to have on small businesses, is the line that we heard a lot during the session. So that was really frustrating. I know there are a lot of advocates who are still smarting from that loss. And the other vote that was taken that day, as had been widely anticipated, was a vote to put Amendment 3, the issue of abortion legalization in Missouri, back on the ballot. Fortunately, at least With that issue, voters will get to vote again since this is a constitutional amendment, unlike Proposition A, which was just passed as a simple statute. So voters will get to vote again. We are waiting to hear if that election will wait until the regularly scheduled elections that will happen next August and November, or if the governor will call a special election between now and then. Essentially they knew and had been saying all session long that if they did the PQ, that it would immediately be the end of the session. And that's what happened. Those two votes happened, and then the Senate ended for the year. We are going to talk about a number of consequential bills that passed this session throughout the presentation. Looking forward to having you hear from all of our wonderful policy managers today. But a couple of quick things I wanted to just name that won't appear in any other section. One, Missouri became the first state in the country to pass a bill to phase out our capital gains tax. So that tax will be eliminated immediately for individuals, and then there is a phase in for the elimination of the tax for corporations. Estimates of what this is going to do to our budget vary pretty wildly, but we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that will disappear from our revenue on an annual basis. So that is going to be a big thing that we are looking out for, especially as federal budget negotiations continue and the federal government looks at shifting more costs that they have typically covered to states. This is a really bad time to be eliminating massive chunks of revenue from the state budget, especially massive chunks of revenue that come from very wealthy people who didn't need that tax cut that they got. So I think that was a pretty shameful decision on behalf of the legislature to take that on. The other thing that I'll name, just because I do think it is going to come up as we look at putting the abortion issue back on the ballot, and that is that the legislature very sneakily passed a piece of legislation that modifies the way that ballot summary statements are created. We know from the conversation leading up to Amendment 3 being on the ballot last year that there was a lot of controversy about the way that that issue was going to appear on the ballot. And so the legislature just went ahead and passed a bill pretty early in session that says that it really limits the court's ability to do those modifications, and it will give a lot more power to the Secretary of State's office. And so we are going to be monitoring that very closely in the months and years ahead. And then I will just wrap up by saying that, as many of you are likely aware, normally at this point we would be done for the year until a veto session in September. But it has been announced that the legislators will be coming back in early June to debate a bill over potential stadium funding for the Chiefs and the Royals on the Kansas City side of the state. My understanding is that Kansas has offered them a pretty sweet deal to build new stadiums for their teams across the state line. And so Missouri legislators are looking to make them a competitive offer to stay. I have big feelings about public financing for stadiums, but it isn't the time or the place for that. So stay tuned to our podcast, Under the Dome, in the weeks ahead. I'm sure that Sarah and I and others will have some robust discussion about public financing for stadiums. But with that, I will turn it back over to Lucas.
Great. Thanks, Mallory. So next, we're going to turn to some of the community justice policies and bills that were passed around criminal legal system reforms and turn it over to Gwen Smith-Moore.
Thank you so much, Lucas. My name is Gwen Smith-Moore. I am one of two of our criminal justice policy managers, along with Rika White. I am going to share a link in the chat right now to join our Community Justice Coalition if you're not already a member. We meet for now until the remainder of the year. We meet once monthly to discuss all different types of community justice issues, from diversion and policing practices, all the way to issues of reentry, and everything in between. And we have a lot to talk about today, so I will just get into it. Next slide, please. First off, I want to give you guys an update on Clean Slate, which has been a big issue that Empower Missouri, and many other organizations and advocates across the state have been pushing for several years now. This was the third year that Clean Slate legislation was filed in both chambers. Clean Slate, for anyone not familiar, is legislation that would automate the expungement process in Missouri. Right now, we have a petition-based system, so you have to be, one, aware that you qualify for an expungement, and two, able to jump through the various hoops and obstacles that currently exist in order to actually obtain that expungement. The upshot is that of the over 500,000 Missourians that have a record that qualifies to be expunged, less than 1% have actually been able to access that expungement because the process is confusing, it's time consuming. There are various expenses associated with it, including having to retain an attorney. You have to go back to the county of origin. Very cumbersome process that we would like to see automated. The state knows who qualifies for expungements, and we believe that it should be on the state to process those expungements, so that people are able to move forward with their lives and don't have that scarlet letter of perpetual punishment hanging over them. We know that having a criminal record is a huge barrier for housing, for employment, for education, for being able to, move your life in a forward direction for your family and dependents. So Clean Slate really is just, a very core issue for the Community Justice Coalition. And we had a good year for Clean Slate. It didn't end the way that we wanted to. We wanted to see Clean Slate passed, of course, but it did get further this session than it ever has. On the Senate side, we had two bills filed, Senate Bill 19, which was sponsored by Senator Brian Williams. This did have an initial early hearing in the Judiciary Committee, and it was a powerful hearing, with great testimony shared in support of Clean Slate. But unfortunately, on the Senate side, it did not move any further. The other Senate bill that we had was Senate Bill 435, sponsored by Senator Curtis Trent. Both Trent and Williams have been previous sponsors for Clean Slate. Unfortunately, Senator Trent's bill did not receive a hearing this year, but the House side was really where Clean Slate got some great traction. House Bill 953 was sponsored by Representative Bishop Davidson, who was really just a stellar sponsor, kind of everything that you could hope for with a bill sponsor, in that he took feedback very seriously. He was working on his own time to try to come up with compromises, and deal with some of the obstacles that came up throughout session on this. So we are very grateful to Representative Davidson for being a great champion for Clean Slate. It had an initial hearing in the Economic Development Committee back in February, which was a great committee assignment for us because we really were able to talk about Clean Slate as an economic issue, which it very much is. And that kind of brings a wider audience of support than just framing it as a criminal legal issue. Clean Slate was voted out of its committee, out of its subsequent rules committee, and it did make it to the House floor where it was perfected. Unfortunately, it passed or failed to pass out of a further fiscal review committee, and we know that this was due to some behind the scenes opposition from the courts that we have been working hard to kind of address some of their concerns around implementation. So we've got quite a lot of work to do before next session on Clean Slate, but again, we're celebrating that this is the furthest that Clean Slate language has moved in either chamber. I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now to our Clean Slate website. So if you're not already connected to us on the Clean Slate campaign, would love to be able to send you updates and talk to you more about that policy issue. So please sign up there, and you can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Correctional oversight is another policy issue that Empower Missouri and other advocates have been pushing strongly for. And this was a great year for correctional oversight in terms of, there was more time in front of legislators with this issue than I think in any other session. So although the bills did not advance out of their original committees, senators and representatives got to hear from a diverse group of advocates talking about this issue. Both of those hearings, I thought the lawmakers were pretty engaged, asking questions of folks giving testimony. And so I think, when you think about, I think they say that the average length of time that it takes for something to pass in Missouri is 5 years. Oversight, this is certainly not the first year that oversight bills have been filed. But I think that this was the best year we've had in terms of really getting airtime on this issue. So hopeful that some advocacy between now and the start of 2026 will have even more momentum going into next session. So we had Senate Bill 378, sponsored by Senator Angela Mosby. This was Senator Mosby has filed this bill multiple times for her constituent Maria Miller, whose brother Larry tragically lost his life a decade ago in a Missouri prison. This bill was its first time being heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee. It did pass out of committee. I might have misspoke earlier and said that they didn't make it further, but this bill was voted out of committee, and I thought it was a really great hearing. There wasn't any further movement after that vote. On the House side, there was a trio of oversight bills that were heard together. House Bill 603 from Representative Bill Lucas, House Bill 729 from Representative Kimberly Collins, and House Bill 774 from Representative Bill Allen. These were heard in the Corrections and Public Institutions Committee. The folks giving testimony were directly impacted individuals, formerly incarcerated folks, people that have loved ones inside prisons, former correctional staff, really a diverse group to just show that, it's not just one group calling for oversight. This is an issue that impacts everybody that lives, works, loves anybody that is inside a Missouri prison. We need external oversight. There have been unprecedented number of deaths inside custody, as well as a host of other issues, including medical neglect. And correctional oversight really establishes this external system. So, if there's a staff member that wants to blow the whistle on an issue, if there is, a mother or father that wants to find out information about what is going on with their loved one that they haven't gotten any updates from because they're in solitary confinement, for example. Right now, there's not any kind of, external person that is not within the DOC leadership system for folks to turn to. So this would create that system of external oversight. The ombudsman office would be tasked with regular inspections, unannounced inspections of Missouri prisons. The board would be made up. If you look at House Bill 603, that is some good kind of example. Or actually, I think House Bill 774 is the most up-to-date language. And there's a very specific board structure outlined that includes, a former prison staffer, former medical staffer, formerly incarcerated man, formerly incarcerated woman, someone from a prisoner advocacy group. And so this is, I think one of the single most important issues that can really impact the quality of life for people that are currently incarcerated. Obviously, we want to reduce the scope and impact of our carceral system in Missouri overall. That's one of the overarching goals of the CJC. But as it stands today, there are many, many people in Missouri prisons, and they are at risk because we don't have the system of external oversight. So it was great to see some good discussion around this issue in these hearings, and we are really hopeful that going forward, this issue will continue to have a lot of momentum. Next slide, please. One other update on some bills that advocates successfully fought against this session. There were multiple bills to expand prison sentences filed in both chambers. These bills got early hearings. There's bills to expand prison sentences every year. That's not the unusual part. I think what was a little bit unusual this session was that these bills did get early hearings. They got a little bit more kind of validity, I feel like, than previous sessions prison expansion bills have gotten. The Senate bills didn't advance out of committee, but on the House side, multiple bills were combined into a single bill, House Bill 862, and that was advanced out of committee. House Bill 862, and I'll back up for just a second to say these types of bills you might hear, referred to as mandatory minimum bills or truth in sentencing bills. The idea behind this truth in sentencing is that proponents of these bills say, that the actual time someone serves in prison needs to be more clear from sentencing, which I don't think, advocates necessarily disagree with. We just disagree with the way that that is gone about. Some of the biggest proponents for these bills have been sheriffs throughout the state of Missouri. So this is a very, has the support of a lot of law enforcement, which I think is why these bills got so much airtime this year. House Bill 862 proposed a really massive change to our current minimum prison term structure. Right now in Missouri, you are subject to serving a minimum percentage of your sentence if the following applies. It's only for folks that have been sentenced to a specific subset of serious felony offenses, and then additionally have a prior prison commitment. Or folks that have been convicted of a dangerous felony, which is another even shorter subset of offenses. In that case, you have to serve a minimum of 85% of your sentence. But for other folks, it's, a slightly longer list of serious felony offenses. You also have to have been previously served time in a Missouri prison. Then there are certain minimum term requirements that would apply to your sentence. House Bill 862 would have expanded that to apply to anybody that's convicted of any felony if they also have a previous felony conviction. So here the big changes are, instead of a previous prison commitment, it's a previous felony conviction. We know a lot of people might have a prior felony conviction, but haven't served time in prison, right? They might have, been on probation or something like that. So it's expanding the pool there. But then instead of only looking at the subset of serious felony offenses, this would apply to anyone convicted of any felony with that previous record, including drug offenses, property crimes, for example, like passing a bad check to try to provide for your family. So these nonviolent offenses that currently are not included in the minimum sentence structure would be thrown in there. And so the expansion to Missouri prisons would be extremely consequential. The fiscal note for this bill reflected that. It showed cost upwards of 280 million once fully implemented, said that the DOC would almost certainly need to build a new prison to accommodate additional sentence time, sentence length. Those projected costs would be between 800 million and $1 billion. And so the lofty fiscal note, I think, kind of killed the bill for the 2025 session. It did not pass out of a fiscal review committee. But we know that the supporters behind these bills are not going anywhere and can definitely expect doubling down for 2026 on these efforts to expand prison sentences. So advocates should definitely continue talking to their lawmakers about why this is not good policy for our state. And if you care about public safety, there are a lot of better ways to go about improving public safety than sending people to prison for longer. Next slide, please. The one really big criminal justice bill that did pass passed very early on in session. It was sent to the governor's desk before spring break. This is House Bill 495, which turned into a huge omnibus bill with lots and lots of different criminal legal related provisions, but the kind of core issue of 495 is around state takeover of the St. Louis Metro Police Department. This is something that Republican leaders have been attempting to do for many years now. Newly elected Governor Kehoe identified this as the number one criminal legal priority for his administration this session, and so that was the backing that it needed for them to finally be able to push this through this year. St. Louis is now going to be joining Kansas City as the only two cities in the country who do not have control over their police departments. We saw a lot of scapegoating of St. Louis City. And a lot of things identified as issues that truly are not unique to our city. I am a St. Louis City resident. I do not think that state takeover is the way to address any of the issues that we have here in our city. Low policing staffing levels was one concern cited. That is an issue that almost every single police jurisdiction in the country, I think, is experiencing. Rising crime rates was also cited as an issue. Missouri actually has had decreased crime rates in recent years, while Kansas City has seen some increases. And so, we really don't think that state control is a path forward that makes sense. On a host of levels, but unfortunately, this was passed. It was also passed with an emergency clause that put it into effect essentially immediately, although there's several steps that need to take place, mainly around board appointments that come from the governor's office. To the state board that need to kind of fall into place before this is truly fully in effect. The state board is going to have numerous powers and duties, including appointing a police chief, setting the number of officers that's needed, setting the salaries of officers, which in the city of St. Louis, we have salary parity between police, fire, and paramedics. So, this is going to have an outsized impact on other aspects of the city budget as well, and the overall budget for the police department. City ordinances that could conflict or interfere with the powers or the exercise of those powers from the boards of police commissioners are banned. So things that the city of St. Louis has maybe previously passed around police oversight or around limiting the use of for example, like the ShotSpotter surveillance technology. All of those, previous local wins against the carceral state at a local level are going to be peeled back. So I think the impact here we'll really see expand over the next couple years. The bill also stipulates a funding increase, which, when fully instated in 2028, would require 25% of the city's general revenue be earmarked for the police department. Using the budget numbers for fiscal year 2025, that 25% minimum would mean a funding increase of over $13 million for the police department, or a 10% increase from what we currently have. So we'll continue to watch this implementation and provide updates. But yeah, unfortunately, that did pass in 495. But we'll end with a little bit of good news. If we can go to the next slide, thank you. So as I said, it turned into a huge bill. The final bill was 68 pages long, with many, many provisions. Some of those provisions not so great, but a couple that I do really want to call out and celebrate. So we'll get into some of the mixed bag ones first. So the Department of Public Safety must report the immigration status of anyone arrested. We saw a couple bills this year kind of attacking undocumented folks. And so this did make it into the final version of 495. There's some new annual reporting requirements for prosecuting attorneys that I think will be a good thing for the sake of data collection. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but you can see that there are some new offenses created around stunt driving, some sentencing expansion around specific serious sexual crimes, a new stealing offense created of organized retail theft. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Some positive reforms around the use of criminal informants in court cases. We know that this is a big issue for folks that have been wrongfully convicted. Oftentimes, the person that served as an informant in their case was, incarcerated in jail and being offered some kind of concession for testifying. And so this would create a database so jurors and the defense can see if there is a pattern that someone has testified multiple times as informants against different people in different cases and kind of see that pattern. A committee on school safety within the Department of Public Safety is being established. This would require the Department of Public Safety to kind of come up with some uh, consolidated school safety planning around emergency situations in schools throughout the state. There are basic training for police that must include at least 6 hours of anti-racial profiling training. Um, this language from Senator Angela Mosley, she's been working on for many years, trying to establish the Missing and Murdered African American Women and Girls Task Force. So that was a big win. And then I think the biggest celebrations for the CJC from 495 are these ones that I've bolded here. Phone call cost in jails will be capped at 12 cents a minute. That is legislative language that some folks have been advancing for many years now. That was passed in 495. Similarly, protections for pregnant people incarcerated in jail, including a ban on restraints during labor, access to mental health care, adequate nutrition, and various postpartum support. These protections already exist for people incarcerated in Missouri prisons, but had not until now existed for people incarcerated in Missouri jails. 495 will repeal the Missouri Incarceration Reimbursement Act. This is a law that's been on the books since the late 80s in our state that allows the Attorney General's office to seize assets that an incarcerated person might have, such as life insurance payments from the loss of a loved one, settlement money from abuse suffered at a different jail or a different state prison. Coming into, profits from the sale of a house. The AG's office has had the ability to and the will to go after that money from incarcerated individuals, and that has devastating consequences for the incarcerated individual that was going to use that money to provide for their family while they're inside or to jumpstart their reentry. And that money, $10,000, $15,000, everything to the individual and their family, but essentially insignificant and meaningless. A drop in the bucket of Missouri state budget. The original idea behind these laws is that it's recouping the cost that it costs to incarcerate someone by going after their assets. And an important distinction, we're not talking about like money related to someone's criminal enterprise. That is like civil asset forfeiture and a totally different thing. So a group of attorneys has been, fighting against Mira representing folks in these cases, trying to draw attention, and a series of articles from St. Louis Post-Dispatch editorial reporter Tony Messenger also did a really excellent job of highlighting this issue, and so I think that's why we saw this make it into the final language of 495. So this is definitely something to celebrate. And then last but not least, we saw expansion of restitution for individuals that have been wrongfully convicted. Currently, in Missouri, you have to have been found innocent through DNA evidence to qualify for restitution. This would expand that to folks found innocent through other evidentiary means, and it increases restitution amounts for all those wrongfully convicted. The current number is $100 a day, and an annual max of 36,500. With the passage of 495, that is being increased to $179 a day per day that someone was wrongfully convicted, up to a $65,000 annual maximum. And this, again, is language that advocates have been fighting for many years, so we were excited to see it included in this bill. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gwen. Busy presentation today and a really busy legislative session for you, Enrico White, our other community justice policy manager. So thanks for all that you did during the session. Next, we'll turn to food security policies, and I'll turn it over to Amanda Berry.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us. I'm Amanda Berry. I'm one of two food security policy managers at Empower Missouri. The other one is Christine Woody, who is unable to join us today. And we're just going to take a few minutes to review the food security legislation that we worked on this past session. This is just a broad overview of the bills that we were in support of and the bills that we were in opposition of. Next slide, please. So the first one, neither of these bills passed. Missouri currently has a modified ban on those who have a drug-related felony. That means that they are not able to access SNAP benefits. And it's very difficult to get around these modifications. Most people with a drug-related felony are still banned for life from SNAP. Senator Luke DeMeyer is extremely opposed to the issue and would not allow it to be added to any kind of legislation that was moving. Work moving forward is trying to convince him to allow it or to allow it to move, or we're honestly just hoping that he leaves the Senate since he's been the primary obstacle for the last couple of years. Sorry. The map on this slideshow, all the green states, they do not have a ban currently, which is fantastic. The ones in blue, which include Missouri, we do have a modified ban, and then only South Carolina is left having the full ban. Christine did work really hard to get one of these bills passed. It did not pass, but she worked really hard. House Bill 916 had a hearing. She testified, did a fantastic job. It did pass out of the House, but was ultimately dropped from the calendar at the last minute on May 8th. Next slide, please. So our bills on donated food pantry tax credit fixes. These bills would have fixed the current language in the donated food tax credit and in other tax credits as well. That automatically charges taxpayers a penalty and interest when they only received an apportionated portion of the credit. This, despite support from both sides of the aisle and quite a bit of movement in both chambers, neither of these bills were able to pass as well. Next slide, please. Grocery tax elimination. There were a lot of bills filed. As you can see, all of the ones on the left did not have a hearing. We did have one hearing on Senate Bill 57. Some of the bills eliminated only state taxes, while others eliminated state and local taxes. The one that had a hearing was filed by Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, and it removed both state and local taxes. I testified in support along with Missouri Appleseed, Kids Win Missouri, and the Missouri Catholic Conference. However, there was a lot more testimonies in opposition. Everybody that was testifying in opposition were representatives of some form of local government or city boards, councilmen's, alderman boards. And the takeaway from that and the common theme was that the cities are reliant on the funding provided by these grocery taxes to fund public services. And until a solution can be created to replace that funding, passage of any of these bills are going to be extremely difficult. Next slide, please. So this is a really short one as well because none of these bills moved. We didn't have any hearings. There are bills to expand access to free school meals. The four bills on the left created universal free school meal policies. So all of the school meals in every school that was participating throughout the state would have been free to everybody, regardless of income. And then Mosley's Senate Bill 131 would have eliminated the reduced price copay for school lunch. Unfortunately, they did not have a hearing, and we're doing some restructuring going into the 2026 campaign. Next slide, please. So this was a win for us. Fortunately, this bill did not pass. This would have prohibited TANF recipients from being able to access cash with their TANF benefits, which is pretty much the point of TANF. The bill would have asked Missouri to submit a waiver to allow the state to do that. But our belief is that this would never be allowed based on federal guidelines, at least the way the federal guidelines have been established currently and in the past. And then finally, next slide, please. The other big win, fortunately, the SNAP food choice restriction bills did not pass as well. We teamed up with grocers, the Chamber of Commerce, the Beverage Association to stop these bills. There were hearings. Unfortunately, there is still tons of pressure at the national level trying to get this to happen. The Make America Healthy Again and Kennedy, they're all reaching out to our state legislators, really putting the pressure on this. Unfortunately, this can also happen administratively without passing legislation. And because of this pressure, there's a lot of concern that the government ultimately may just ask the department to submit the waiver anyway. And other states have already passed these bills and done it via executive waiver. So it's a win, but we're holding our breath on the win. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Amanda. And our last, but certainly not least, housing focus area is affordable housing. So I'll turn it over to Misha Smith to give you the rundown on those bills.
Hi, everyone. I am Misha Smith, and I am one of the Affordable Housing Policy Managers, and I will be going over what happened with housing policies this session. Next slide, please. Okay, so these were bills that were filed, along with if we supported them or opposed them, and I will be going more in depth with majority of these on the next slides. So one bill that passed before spring break and with a lot of support from those that wanted it to pass was the utility rate bill. Consumer Council of Missouri is a great organization that was really following this and keeping people updated. But what this was truly agreed and finally passed April 9th, signed by Governor Kehoe pretty quickly after that. But basically, this will allow for utility companies to increase rates based on future projects. And the Consumer Council of Missouri estimates this will increase household utility cost in Missouri by about $1,100 annually. And then this is in addition to other rate increases, which Consumer Council of Missouri did send us information that Spire is already looking for a 15% utility increase. And interesting enough, because we've been on the topic of kind of like what we voted for and then things that happened. In 1976, Missourians did vote to ban the construction work in progress, which is basically that passing the future cost or the future cost of projects onto households currently. So that did pass, and we did oppose that very strongly. And this was not something we were excited about, but they did bring in a lot of support to get this passed quickly. Next slide. This is a big one we've been talking about for a while. Source of income discrimination ban preemption. If you are not familiar with the source of income discrimination bans, those are bans that are put in place and voted on and put in place that basically give protections to tenants to not be discriminated against when it comes to applying for housing as a renter based on their source of income. Also, background checks and credit scores can be a part of that. But the biggest area that we do see discrimination is for those tenants who are applying to rent housing, and they do receive a housing choice voucher, which are federally funded housing assistance programs. They do tenants do pay 30% of their income for housing, and the remainder of that is paid through these federal grants. And there's been a lot of support to get these bills through. So the preemption means that the source of income discrimination bans that are in place in Clayton, Columbia, St. Louis, Webster Grove, and most recently Kansas City, on August 28th, when this goes into effect as a law, those will no longer allowed to be enforced, and any areas that wanted to consider voting and passing ordinances to put source of income discrimination bans in place are not going to be allowed to. And this now means that there can be direct discrimination against tenants based solely on their source of income or their use of housing choice vouchers. It also removes regulations on security deposits that landlords can charge when a client is wanting to move in. There are cases where landlords are asking tenants who use vouchers to pay a high risk fee, which is in addition to the deposit amount. This adds an extra cost. And I know in my previous role as a housing program manager, our federal funding that we had could not cover this. And so tenants who may have been receiving rental assistance and receiving help with those move-in costs to help them get into housing quickly, they had to find a way to get those high risk fees and those additional security deposits covered. We really struggled with getting that done. And so this was a bill that we've been fighting for a long time. And I will say, even though this passing was a loss, I will say a win that we're holding on to is, I know last year, as we were in the 2024 session, as we were testifying this, we were really outnumbered. And this year, as we were testifying, there were times where we were even or we even outnumbered those that supported the bill. So the building up that advocacy at the ground level and at the local level has really been happening, and we know that it's going to continue. So I wanted to throw in that win as we are building up advocates across the state. Next slide, please. And then Mallory mentioned about the capital gains tax credit, which not something we supported, but often, or we do have times. This is the second year in a row that we have had housing policy that we've supported added to a bill we did not support to get it through. Last year in 2024, it was land banks enabling legislation. This year we got the circuit breaker tax credit that was added as a Senate substitute, language added as part of the Senate substitute to the capital gains tax credit bill, HB 594. It was truly agreed and finally passed on May 7th and sent to Governor Kehoe. As we said, the main focus of the bill was the capital gains, but the circuit breaker tax credit language added is something that we have strongly supported for many years, and this will increase both the income eligibility and credit amount for seniors and those with disabilities, and also add in automatic future increases based on inflation. And this just gives them a tax credit on the circuit breaker tax credit language. And so this is a win for households to save them money when our housing costs are going up so much. Next slide, please. And then these were bills that were filed or two of the bills were filed this year. One of them, we have a campaign. I'll be sharing some links and you can learn more about it. But the first one, HB 1316, was filed by Representative Billington. It did not move very far, but it is a landlord registration and licensing bill. And mainly, if you are familiar with healthy homes or landlord rental inspection programs, this is what it relates to. So like right now in Kansas City, and Springfield is working has been working to pass a healthy homes ordinance. This has landlords, they pay about $21 per unit that they own and rent out, and they have their units inspected. If it meets the most basic safety and quality standards, then they are licensed, and they are also listed as a landlord who has participated in this program, and their housing does meet quality standards. Rep Billington, the argument they're using is that these charges would cost or cause the cost of rent to go up, which they would have to pass on to tenants. And we do fully expect this to come back in 2026 and to have a high priority. And this would, again, like the SOI discrimination bans, it would preempt any current landlord or rental inspection programs like Healthy Homes, like a rental inspection program in Independence, Missouri, or even new ones from being enforced, like what they are working very hard on in Springfield. So we are watching that one very closely. And we will be down there fighting it very hard. They also, Cicero is back. They are the ones, the bipartisan think tank that was behind the homeless criminalization language that we've seen. They Senator Trent introduced a bill that also did not go very far, but it's the drug-free homeless service zones. And basically, this is looking at another way to criminalize homelessness, that if there is someone who is within a certain amount of feet of any of these agencies that are providing services to people who are experiencing homelessness, they could get a misdemeanor. The agency could lose state funding for up to 3 years if they are seen as contributing. And one thing that this could potentially impact is we do have harm reduction agencies that are doing lawful work, but this could, if wanted, could fall under providing drug paraphernalia, not drugs, but drug paraphernalia, and could be a way to take funding away from these agencies and to criminalize the people who are going there to get things for safety. And then another thing, we did not file a bill this year because we are working on a really strong campaign to increase funding and get a Republican sponsor, but it is the Missouri Housing Trust Fund. The Missouri Housing Trust Fund was passed in part through a lot of advocacy efforts of Empower Missouri in 1994. And this money is funded through a recording fee. So whether you buy a $50,000 property or a $5 million property, you file your documents with the state and you pay a fee. The general fee across the state, it can vary by a few dollars across the state. But most places it's about $21 for the first sheet, $3 each additional. That first page of the documents that you file, they take about $7 of that and send it to the state. $3 of that, just $3 one time, goes to the state and goes into this Missouri Housing Trust Fund. And this goes towards construction, rehab, capacity building of nonprofit agencies that provide housing support, emergency and ongoing rental assistance, as well as homeless prevention. The money goes to that. It is, and over the past few years, it has been so underfunded because it's also connected to the previous year's real estate activity. 2/3 of requests are denied. And this is causing a lot of issues in our state, especially as we are seeing, not enough funding coming through the federal level. And so we want to increase this. And I will drop some links that you can learn more about the campaign and also about the Affordable Housing Coalition and the work that we are doing. And next slide, but I may be done. Yeah, I'm done. I will drop those slides, and if you have any questions, you are free to contact me at the email I will provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Misha. Yeah, really excited about what we might be able to do in Missouri with the Missouri Housing Trust Fund and expanding access to affordable housing. There's already a mechanism to support it. And so we're really excited to see what we can get done next session, which is a great transition to what's next. You can go to the next slide. We do have some upcoming training. So if you're interested in learning more about the legislative process, getting some training on how to meet with lawmakers, use a media strategy, please register. I just dropped the link in the chat. For our Civic Engagement 101, we've got 3 session options coming up to just learn a little bit more. Everyone that can contribute to advocacy in our state, as I think you may have seen throughout this, when we show up and have powerful advocates, we can fight back about good things or bad things and get good things passed. And something a little bit new that we're doing this summer is doing a federal advocacy 101. And so diving in, although a lot of our attention, and obviously this session webinar has been about the Missouri legislative session, there are lots of things happening on the federal level. I'm sure I do not need to remind anyone on this call that there are lots of things happening on the federal level. But if you want to have a little deeper dive in advocacy and the lawmaking process at the federal level, we're holding a 3-part training series, and you can register at the link. And then if you can go to the next slide, speaking of federal advocacy, we're right now in the midst of a really important fight for food security and nutrition in Missouri. So the federal government, I think actually as I speak, President Trump is at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., trying to convince House Republicans to rally around a bill that does many things, but one of the things I want to talk about today is that it cuts $290 billion from SNAP. It's about a 30% decrease in federal funding. It's the largest cut ever in the history of the SNAP or food stamp program. And so our executive director, Mallory Rush, you met earlier, is going to Washington, D.C. to meet with Missouri's congressional delegation to tell them to oppose these cuts and explain how important SNAP is. We need your help. I just put in the chat a sign-on letter. We want to make sure that when we meet with the Missouri congressional delegation, we could tell them about all these folks and organizations and communities who are letting them know that SNAP is important in their community and that we do not need less funding for really critical nutrition assistance in an anti-hunger program in Missouri, that it'll devastate communities all over. 1 in 10 Missourians receive SNAP benefits. So it truly is something that will impact every county, every zip code, every part of our state. And so I encourage you both, if you have not already, sign on to the letter, and please share it widely. If you are part of an organization who can support these, please use the link and sign on to the letter so that we can push back on these really, really harmful cuts to an important program in Missouri and across the country. With that, I think we're done. Please remember to follow us on social media. Thank you for your time, for all your support, for all your work during the legislative session. And I'm sure I will see you at many of these trainings and events in the future.